Welcome to the Nerdosphere. I am one of your hosts, Corbin. Joined with me today is Titan Tim and horror author aficionado himself, Paul Tremblay. Boys.
Yeah. Pretty good.
I like the energy. That was good energy. Clayton's usually our intro guy, but I think you maybe one-upped him tonight. That was solid.
Yeah, I do the intro for our anime podcast, and so I try to interject some of that weebish nature into it, you know.
I think Clayton just lost his job. Although it's funny, like within the last year, I have learned what a weeb is because my children both, I guess, sort of are. But now, my daughter in particular makes me watch, or tries to, I should say tries to make, I enjoy watching it, but like we just started watching, I'm going to forget the name of it. It's terrible. But she and I need to watch the second season of One Punch Man. That's all I have to say.
I think last time we talked to you, weren't you getting ready to dabble in Attack on Titan? Already had?
Yeah, I sort of left it just because there's so many damn episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like it, but for me, I don't know. It's just so daunting. I need things that are like limited. I'm a limited person at this point.
You only have so much time.
Paul.
Yeah.
Welcome to my hell, where Corbin's like, okay, you got to watch an anime. There's 417 episodes.
I have not recommended any of those animes to
pick up until around episode 73. But it's okay. They're fast watchers. They're only 25-minute episodes. But once you get to episode 74.
Right. I will say I've taken a break, but I have enjoyed watching Full Metal Alchemist too. That's been fun.
Yes. Are you doing the original run or the Brotherhood? I guess is the best way to ask.
I think, is it the Brotherhood one where it's like the two brothers? Is that the Brotherhood?
Yeah. So without getting into too much weeb knowledge, there is an original run of the Full Metal anime that caught up to the manga and then had to make its own ending, kind of like Game of Thrones. And then after the manga ended, they redid the anime called Full Metal Brotherhood. So it's both the same story, just with two different endings. So.
I think this one's, all the title is Full Metal Alchemist. I don't think I ever hear Brotherhood mentioned. So
okay, let me ask you this: in the pilot episode, is it them kind of like making the transmutation circle while it's raining outside, or is it an intro where they're chasing this ice alchemist through the streets of a town?
Ice alchemist.
Okay, you're watching Brotherhood. We've established.
Okay, all right.
But the purists will say that you're watching the right one. I have a quandary of opinions on it. But.
Yeah. And there's, quasi horror elements to it. So that's somewhat adjacent to what we're talking about today. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. He's watched more anime than me at this point, probably, Corbin.
I know. He should be on the anime podcast, not you.
I know. He definitely should. Well, Paul, it's been probably about a year since we have last talked. And right when we talked last time, I think Survivor Song had just come out. And the timing of that release couldn't have been, well, I think it was perfect. It definitely adds an element of creepy to that book. Do you want to maybe talk about Survivor Song, maybe tease it to some of our listeners who haven't checked it out yet?
Sure, because we're still living in that book.
We definitely are.
I sort of joke because I think maybe at the time the hardcover just come out. Now the trade paperback came out this summer. Which has a little bit of an extra in it. It has like a 2,000-word essay sort of on the writing of the book and what it was like having a pandemic, or it's not even having an infected virus book come out during a pandemic. And since this might go on YouTube, tomorrow, I'm holding this up for people who are watching, but tomorrow a mass market sized edition is coming out. So that might be in some grocery stores or like Targets and stuff like that. Fits in your pocket. It looks really big when I hold it close to the screen. If I bring it back, it's like, oh yeah, it is kind of little.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that was really trippy.
Yeah.
Not gonna
lie. And actually, in the back of this one, there's an excerpt from my next novel, which we can talk about later. But Survivor Song, really quickly. It's about an outbreak of a super rabies virus in Massachusetts, and the story is really only told over like 4 to 6 hours. Of what happens to these two main characters. One is a pregnant woman named Natalie. She's in her early 30s. And her best friend, Dr. Romola Sherman, who happens to be a pediatrician. So really the book just follows this 4 to 6 frantic hours of Natalie and Rams, as her friend calls her, trying to find help. Because this isn't much of a spoiler in the first, within the first 10 pages, Natalie is attacked. Her and her husband are attacked by a rabies infected man, and her husband's killed and she is bitten. So it's really sort of a race against the clock for her to try to, figure out if she can be cured, if the baby can be saved, fun horror stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a great book. I actually listened to the audio book last year on vacation, and it's incredibly haunting. You do a really good job of gripping you in and making you feel a connection with these characters. And there's moments in that book where, like, as a parent, my heart was just bleeding because you can just understand the emotions that she's going through. She's like, what's going to happen to my kid if I don't make it? Who's going to take care of the baby? What if my baby comes out sick? It's all these emotions that felt so real given the uncertainty when I listened to it with COVID, where there were some of my friends and family that were pregnant. And they're like, I don't know what pregnancy looks like anymore now that COVID's a thing and everything's just different. So it's a haunting book. It's incredibly well written. I don't remember if I saw this on your Twitter, Paul. I think it might've been in your essay that was in the jacket of the book, but you had a stat that really gripped me. And it was about, at the time that this book ended, here's what the mortality rate was, or how many people had died. And then here's how many people have died in Massachusetts since COVID hit. And the numbers are just terrifying when you actually take a step back and think about it.
Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, the book has been weird because, not that I'm like a oracle or a sage. I'm clearly not. But like a lot of things that happened in the book that I wrote in 2018 and 2019 sort of ended up happening. And some of it is, we've always known it's been a matter of if not when, in terms of like a pandemic happening.
Right.
And some of the social aspects of it, like I didn't think it was much of a stretch to imagine there being, conspiracy theories about the virus and anti-vax. And if anything, my book, I think underplayed how mainstreamed those things would become. And a lot of the medical stuff that seemed to fit with what we're going through now is all, do the research that my sister helped me with. And she's a nurse in one of the biggest cities in one of the biggest hospitals in Boston. And like their like brush with the Ebola outbreak was how just even the phrase PPE ended up popping up to the book. But yeah, so the thing you mentioned is, it's funny. Like there's this paragraph, let's see if I can find it. There's this paragraph about like 2/3 of the way through, and it's not a real spoiler, but like at one point, like the narrator sort of intercedes just to say, hey, this isn't, because the funny thing is totally people reading this now, and I totally get it, read it as pandemic. Whereas in the story, it's, isolated to Massachusetts epidemic, I guess.
Yeah.
And this paragraph sort of goes into like, this isn't the end of Massachusetts, the end of the US, or the end of the world. To me, I thought that made things, hopefully more, in a weird way, more urgent, more tragic for characters that don't make it. Because if they could just hold on for like, another few weeks, they would have survived too. But yeah, like what you mentioned. So I sort of mentioned that like, the virus doesn't go away because of a variety of reasons that we're all sort of going through now, and by the final tally, 10,000 people have died, which, when I was writing it, it seemed like a pretty horrific big number, but not one that would mean the end of society in Massachusetts. So it's been, I say funny as in, that's odd, not like funny, like, haha, that like, I've had some music, oh, look how off he was on the number of deaths. I'm like, I wasn't trying to predict the amount of people, dying in the United States, but like after a year of COVID, that was the number in Massachusetts, which we've sadly passed. But yeah, no, so it's just all more, I don't know. I mean, everyone's had a weird experience the last 18 months that have, been privileged to survive it. But the book that weirdness has really infected the book for me, how I feel about it.
Yeah.
For people who haven't really connected the dots, when did you start writing Survivor Song?
So the original What If occurred to me in July of 2018, which I don't want to say necessarily because it's sort of spoilerish. And then I started writing it probably in earnest, like about a month later in October of 2018. And I finished the draft that I turned into my publisher in August 2019.
Yeah.
And
so,
then,
I mean, just for a perspective for everybody's listening, this is before COVID was a thing. I know I talked to one of my friends at work today and was talking about getting to hang out with you and this book. And they're like, oh, so he wrote this book during COVID. I'm like, no, he wrote this book way before COVID. You don't write a book like this in 2 months and then publish it right now,
Yeah.
That's only for your Stephen Kings that seem like they can churn out 3 books a year clockwork.
Yeah, and even then, there's so much lead time. I will say, the hardcover. I'm very lucky to have like some very sort of loyal readers, and I know a bunch of them didn't read the book when it first came out, which I totally understand. Like I wasn't out looking for. I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, I'm going to go watch Contagion now, which happened, right. At the beginning. That's not me. Like, I totally get if you didn't want to read the book now, but it's been nice to hear from people who's like, I've waited to read this, but I'm glad I have, because they found like a measure of hope in the book, which is definitely there, and it is, ultimately it is quite different than the COVID virus itself. It's just some of the, things here and there that are like, wow, that's really sort of strange. But yeah, at least people aren't running around biting each other.
For now?
For now. Add some bath salts in there and we're in a world of hurt.
Yeah. I just had someone tell me that like a reader / friend who said, oh yeah, like someone that she knows is very close to her believes in a lot of the conspiracies, and said, not jokingly, half jokingly, that, oh, all you vaccine people are going to turn into zombies in like 10 years. I'm like, well, if so, I'm going to be part of the coolest pack of zombies. We're going to read horror books, watch horror movies, and then we're going to eat all the brains of assholes.
Just have like a bucket of just like brain kernels.
Yeah.
Like,
although I don't know if I'd be a fan of the brain part. Like, I don't know. Maybe I could just like mess them up. I don't know if I actually want to consume the brain.
Okay, that's fair.
Just infect them. That's the goal.
Yeah,
right? Maybe a little nibble on the arm.
I know. When it comes down to it, I was like, all right, fine. I'll just give you a little bad limp, maybe. Like, bite you in the shin.
There you go.
Bony.
So Paul, your writing process, I find people's writing process to be fascinating because it could be so different. But, when you first get your idea for a story, can you walk us through like what are the first few things you do? And then when you have a fully fledged idea, how long does it take you to map out your story and actually from, pen to paper, write the entire novel?
Yeah. So every novel is a little bit different, even if they're not, I try to fool myself into thinking they're a little bit different just to try to keep everything fresh. I don't want to feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. But typically what I do, is I'm sitting here at my messy desk. I've got tons of notebooks lying around. I've got like a ton of these little, again, that looks huge. And then when I pull it back, little, like almost like they're not all moleskin, but like that kind of style, small pocket notebook. And those are just like my idea notebooks where I can sketch, if I have a loose idea, I'll jot it down. Then I might try to play with it in the notebook just to like mess around with it. So if it's something that, sort of really grabs my attention, I would say probably for like 3/4 of my novels, I'll write a bunch of notes trying to figure out what the loose plot of the book is, and write some sort of plot summary first before I actually write page 1.
Sure.
So I haven't done that with every book. In some books, the plot outline's a lot looser than others. So it's funny, like I have this, I don't know why I pulled this out, but I have this, one of my older notebooks that I use for A Head Full of Ghosts, which is really, the book that sort of broke me in 2015. You can even see like on the first page, I just wrote like random idea and possession, novel point of view I wrote little boy and then crossed it out, little girl. So it was like this really loose idea that then I, scratched out a few more pages and it sort of became A Head Full of Ghosts. So with Survivor Song in particular, I had this what if that really involved the character Natalie, like what she would end up having to go through. And so I don't know. So sometimes like the questions that help build the plot would be like, where she lived, like what she, what sort of like her start. I typically end up having like the beginning in mind and a loose end, and then it's really trying to figure out how I get from A to Z. Anyway, I guess to answer the last part of the question, I'd say typically it takes me about 12 to 15 months from like original idea to turning something into my publisher.
Nice. I've heard from other authors that they're often surprised. They sit down to write the story and they don't even know what paths their characters are going to take. And it just kind of is it's an ever evolving thing where they try to let the characters drive at that point and remove themselves. Is that, something similar that you've seen with your books in the past?
No, I feel like I work differently. I mean, that's not to say like, the characters certainly I feel like drive the stories. And to me, that's sort of the fun part is some of the surprises. if a character says or does something that I wasn't necessarily expecting. But I don't know. For me, like I'm always most nervous about plot because I feel like that's not my strength. I feel much more comfortable with character and style, voice, and those are the kind of things I tend to gravitate towards as a reader anyway. So more times than not, I like to have at least like the loose bones of a plot because I don't feel like I'm good enough to make it up as I go. But things still change. Like in the case of Survivor Song, I essentially only summarize like the first 120 pages, which was like when the friends getting together, getting to the hospital. And really like the last half of the book, maybe even more, I was very hand wavy in my in my summary. I had a vague idea about what the end would be or where it was. So, but again, I try to do what, even if it's not like there, I try to at least, even if it's almost just like window dressing, I try to remind myself or make myself believe that everything that I do is unique and is only in service to this story. Like, the idea that it was loosely plotted for the part that for me was the hardest because it involved the most medical research. Like I felt like I needed to have that down, and then it could sort of be free and open because it does sort of get chaotic after that. And I felt like, okay, maybe that's sort of the mood of the book that I need. I don't know. Like a lot of us writers are weird people, just try to make up games to get us to perform well.
That's super interesting though. I've always been fascinated by like different writers who strength with character voices and with plot. I've always been someone who, if I were to ever write, I think the thing that I would struggle the most is fucking characters. I feel like getting the plot is like the easier idea of like what's engaging, what is interesting, but then having these like different voices that like aren't you talking. So I'm always fascinated to hear writers kind of talk about that process.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's I think, all my major characters definitely have a piece of me, which is kind of, it took me a while sort of to discover that and be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
But then they also have like pieces of other people, and there are pieces like, especially once you go deeper, once they start making decisions and making choices and saying things, they become their own thing, which again is a fun part of if any part of writing is fun. I don't find it very fun. And so the most fun is when I'm done, when I have a thing that I want to show people. That's what I'm addicted to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, a couple of years ago, you wrote a collection of short stories as well. The book was called Growing Things.
Mm-hmm.
Is the thought process or your process significantly different when you're sitting down and saying, I'm going to write 5 short stories, or I'm going to sit down and write a novel? And do you have a preference on which one you prefer to write?
I don't know about a preference. I mean, I might weirdly feel more comfortable with novels at this point, even though, the first 10 to 15 years of my writing life, I was mostly all short stories. And then like was fumbling around trying to write a novel. But it's weird now. It's sort of flipped a little bit where I'm spending, certainly time wise, spending much more time writing novels than I am like the occasional short story. So I found my short stories have grown longer, but I've never had the thing where, like some writers talk about, I had the short story idea and it ballooned and became a novel, or, I thought it was a novel and it was a short. That's like, for me, it's like, okay, I'm writing a short story. And that goes off the feel of like the idea of the what if it feels like, this is really sort of a contained, not necessarily going to blow up into like, a wider world. Now, it's not to say like a short story can't sort of be about a wider world or something like that, but I don't know. Like, I guess for me, the short story is more like this laser intense focus on a moment or the build up to a specific moment.
Yeah.
And where novels,
that makes sense.
Yeah, where novels a little bit different. There still can be that build up to the moment, but the novel is really about how you get up to the moment. Where in the short story, I think it's a little bit more about that moment itself.
Totally. Absolutely. Now, you had mentioned the notebook that had kind of the outline of A Head Full of Ghosts. For those of you who have not read A Head Full of Ghosts or aren't familiar with Paul's work, A Head Full of Ghosts is the novel that kind of made him break through. It's the one that won your first, I always say his name wrong, Bram Stoker or Bram Stoker? Bram, right?
I think either one. I mean, if you were like...
I think I say Bram. I think everybody else says Bram.
I think it's Bram.
I'm going to say Bram. So it's where you won your first Bram Stoker award. And the last time we talked, it was actually something that looked like it had wheels to maybe become a movie. And then I know COVID's kind of changed the equation.
Sure.
Any updates on that? Is there a movie on the way or?
Yeah, I can't say too much, although I mean, I feel like I just got some good news that, there's life back in that potential possibility. Hopefully some sort of announcement maybe later this year.
Fantastic.
It was really close, and it would have filmed the summer of 2020 if anything.
If anything filmed.
we're able to be filmed, and because of that, like a financier backed out, and it was just like
Yeah.
Obviously other people have had much worse problems than I've had. But yeah, that was definitely a bummer. I can't say too much about it, but it feels like The Cabin at the End of the World is actually the closest to becoming a movie.
Excellent.
So fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Fantastic. That's going to be such a weird feeling to see your work brought to life through the lens of somebody else. That's something I've thought about a lot. Of like, a lot of people think that writers are very hands-on when something they've written goes to the big screen or to the little screen. I think in some cases that's definitely the case. But I've watched tons of interviews. I think I watched one recently with Joe Hill where he was completely hands-off with one of his works, and he was like, it was just so weird for me to hear how somebody else was representing a character that in my brain as I was writing the character was completely different. So I don't know, It's just got to be such a weird feeling to experience, to see your work brought to life.
Yeah, I hope I get to experience it.
I do too.
Man.
Yeah, but I would say briefly, I have no say really in Handful of Ghosts. Although, I mean, the producers have been very good about telling me what's up. And similarly with Cabin at the End of the World, Survivor Song has been optioned. They haven't announced who's doing it. Maybe they'll announce it later. I mean, when I say who's doing it, it's still very early in the process.
Sure.
But I might have a little more input in that one because I think I have it's more of an honorary title of associate producer.
Yeah.
But I don't think that wields me any sort of power. I do hope, going forward, I want to try to have a little bit more say in sort of not that anything's been made yet, so it's all sort of weird to talk about,
sure.
But with the novel I just finished and turned in, sort of my agent and I are sort of strategizing to maybe try to get me either as a screenwriter or, just involved in some way, in whatever form, if anything were to happen.
I mean, it sounds like a really fun side, like a new thing to learn, because I have to imagine it's completely different than, actually sitting down and mapping out the story and writing the work.
Definitely.
It's a different world. It's different people to deal with. There's compromise. I mean, it would be a fun, different adventure, I think.
No, for sure. And I would never just be so arrogant to think, I could switch right to screenwriting. It took me a while to figure out how to write novels and a lot of failed attempts. So I've been slowly, here and there, I've been trying to do some screenwriting stuff, nothing that's getting made, but just to try it on my own. I took one of my short stories in Growing Things, 19 Snapshots of Dennisport, and just wrote what I thought would be a feature length version of it.
Yeah.
It was actually, I did enjoy that process because it was different. And you get to play with the first draft software where it puts it into a certain form. I don't know.
Nice.
I like format.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that you just turned in another book to your editors. Is there anything you can tell us about that? I don't know.
Sure.
I know it's early on.
Yeah. So it's going to be called, or it is called, The Pallbearers Club. And it should be out, barring, things are sort of really in flux in publishing land. I don't know if you've heard of the printer apocalypse that's happening, but
I haven't.
No.
There's just, the printers are overwhelmed. There's not enough printers, supply chain issues. So there are actually a lot of books this fall that are getting pushed back, or, bookstores just won't have that many copies of. It's really, sort of strange.
Man, that's interesting.
So anyway, assuming things are sort of better next year, the book should come out July 5th, 2022. Oh. So the novel, I don't have a great Hollywood pitch for it, but the novel, much different than the last two, Survivor Song and Cabin, sort of took place over a very compressed timeline. This book starts in the late 1980s and goes up to just about present day. But the book is presented almost as a memoir of a character who's essentially me, or is me. He calls himself Art Barbara. That's sort of he's changing all the names.
Okay.
And that name just cracks me up because I saw it on a hotel wall once. And Art Barbara in a Boston accent is Art Barbara.
Art Barbara.
Art Barbara. So it's definitely a very New England in some ways novel. But anyway, so Art Barbara is a, self-identifying, and I think other people would identify him as this as well, loser in high school, very few friends, very skinny and awkward. And, he decides to start this thing called the Pallbearers Club, to help him get some like extracurriculars on his college application. So the Pallbearers Club is he volunteers at a local funeral home to serve elderly or homeless or people who don't have a lot of living relatives, which is kind of sweet, but also, still dead people, kind of morbid.
Yeah.
So like this strange older, although he's not sure how much older, is she just college or not? Woman joins his club, and this character becomes like this looming figure throughout the rest of his life. She may or may not be a supernatural figure.
Okay.
And I think part of the fun of the book, is that it's Art's memoir that she found. And, she comments at the end of every chapter, basically like, this is bullshit, or, just making
fact
comments.
checking.
And even as you go deeper into the book, she starts writing notes in the margins and circling stuff and underlining stuff. And my publisher's going to publish it that way for the hardcover, which will be really fun, I think.
Ooh.
Have it actually as like marginalia and circled things and stuff like that.
I love shit like that.
Yeah,
that is
me
super
too.
fun. That's going to force me to actually buy the physical copy. I've been one of these guys who said I would never fall into the trap of owning a Kindle. And then you look at me over the past decade and it's like, it's all I read off of now is a Kindle. And it's hard to beat the convenience of a Kindle when it's like,
Sure.
I can sleep in bed. I can read in bed. My wife's next to me. I don't have to have a light on. It's perfect. But man, I do miss, there's something about just holding a book and feeling the pages. And then you add in stuff like that you just can't get on a tablet, and it changes the equation completely.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there'll be something done for e-readers too, but not it like, because when we do ebooks, you try to satisfy sort of all variants. And there are plenty of people still have like old Kindles where, like handwritten circles are not going to show up,
right.
And stuff like that. So, but yeah, no, I'm excited. Looking forward to people actually reading this book, because it's been this weird thing that's been living in my head through most of this weird time. Like I didn't really start writing it until spring of 2020 and finished it this summer.
Okay.
Yeah, and it sounds
so you've been firing away.
Incredibly intimate and personal as well, since it's loosely based on yourself. So
yeah, definitely. Like it's definitely like messing with autobiographical sort of stuff. But again, it's sort of fun, like how in the beginning in particular, a lot of autobiography, but like once this character makes some much different turns than I ever made, it sort of becomes Barbara.
Barbara. Now, do you live in Massachusetts currently, Paul?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I actually just got back. Thanks for rescheduling last week.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I completely forgot that we had our 11-year wedding anniversary trip and spent a week in Massachusetts for the first time ever, and absolutely loved it. We started in Cape Cod. We hit up Salem. We hit up Boston.
Awesome.
We drove out to Newport, Rhode Island. I mean, the area is just incredibly beautiful.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. No, I grew up in the town next to Salem.
Okay.
So I know that area well.
I'm trying to remember the name of the town we stayed in. We stayed right outside of Salem. Was it Peabody or?
Oh yeah, Peabody.
Something like that. Salem was incredibly interesting. And I think the thing that really stuck with me with Salem is you start going through some of these old houses, or if you go through like the House of the Seven Gables, there's a lot of like background information about here's how people treated illnesses, or, so-and-so got sick. Here's what they did to treat it. And it sounds like witchcraft. Like it's like, crushed up worm with human body fat. And like, it's like the most obscene things you've ever seen. It just makes you start thinking like, how did they decide who was a witch and who was a doctor? Because these doctor remedies,
horse dewormer. Oh no, wait a minute.
Just drink a little bleach, it'll be okay.
That was quite topical. Bravo.
But it made me think while I was there, I'm like, man, the line between being a witch and being a doctor was super thin back then. It was so narrow.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to think about.
I want to be so happy for you in that trip, but I just can't get past myself. I'm sorry, Tim. Salem is like one of the places my girlfriend and I have always wanted to go together, like especially like in the fall around October time. So the fact that you were there and just showing me these pictures, I was like, I want to be so happy for you, but stop sending me photos of this trip. Like Boston is one of my favorite cities I've visited in the US, and I can't wait to go back. And they're like, oh, I'm in Boston too. I'm like, oh, fuck you.
Boston, I'll tell you what, Boston is a cool town. It is the exact opposite of New York City. Like, I felt like when I'm walking down New York City, you know, and I'm looking at people, I like to make eye contact or, you know, kind of like do a little wave. I've never met with like a nice reply. People look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what the fuck are you looking at? You know, you do that in Boston and people are so friendly and they're like, you know, oh man, it was great. And maybe it was just the area that we were on the Freedom Trail. But I mean, everybody was so friendly in Boston, and you go to New York and it's like polar opposite.
Huh. That's
polar
funny.
Opposite. Maybe they were friendly because there's a lot of Missouri people in Boston this weekend for the Mizzou Boston College football game. So maybe I was just running into other people.
There's just other people from Columbia and St. Louis.
That's funny.
or maybe they were laughing at me as I walked by. They're like, "Look at that dork." Probably.
Well, I'm glad the people were friendly. We don't have that reputation, so that's good. Good job. I'm working to improve our reputation.
Hey, good job. Well, boys, I think we're at a point where we can dive into the topic of this podcast. It's a fun topic for anybody who's listened to us for the past few years. October is our spooky month. We usually have an entire month where we talk about something spooky, movies, TV shows, books, you name it. And we wanted to kick off our spooky month by going around and naming the 3 books or movies or shows that define your taste in horror, which I think that's a really fun topic. It's also a really challenging topic because you can go so many different ways with this. But Corbin, I thought it'd be good to start with you for this and just throw out your first movie, book, whatever it is on your list and explain it.
Okay. The first of my 3 would have to be James Wan's The Conjuring. I grew up, for those who listen to the podcast, for a good amount of time know that Clayton and I grew up in a Christian home. Our grandpa was a pastor. Our grandpa's dad was a pastor. Our dad was a pastor for a short amount of time. And so like religious fiction in the sense with like demon possession stuff, like has always been like tantalizing to like my fiction brain, you know? And I just, of a somewhat saturated genre of some subpar horror films that try to tackle the topic, The Conjuring for me hit on all chords. Like the music was phenomenal. I can't remember the hymn, but like the main title track that plays anytime the Warrens are around is like actually like a parody, or not parody. It is just, it's 2 keys down of like an old hymn. So like that kind of like inside that old school like hymnal book that of all those songs I used to love as a kid. And it just like the cinematography in the movie was just on like a different level than typical horror films. Like it wasn't a phoned in slasher. Not that that's anything wrong with like 80s slashers, but like it seemed like it was just taking it more seriously. Like it was trying to tell this really grounded story in the sense that we're with this family. It's very character driven. And I fucking love that movie. And it like the ending, the third act still gives me like semi chills anytime I watch it. And it probably is like the one movie when I was watching it in theaters, like I felt like a little uncomfortable just because like, I don't know, like the way that the possession was presented, I was like, this is how I've always thought this would go. And so it almost seemed like an accurate depiction of something like that. So I don't know. Conjuring 1 is definitely probably of the 3 movies I would choose that kind of define my taste in horror.
Nice.
I would say you need to, I mean, if that's sort of your religious horror is your jam, you need to watch Midnight Mass, the new series.
Just dropped and I wanted to watch it. So it's good.
Yeah. I'm 5 episodes in. It's really, really good.
Okay.
And I'm really like impressed sort of like how, you know, and how they're portraying like the Catholic religious stuff in particular, and how like that's part of the story. Yeah, it's dark. It's messed up. Hopefully it sticks the landing, but I think, you know, it sounds like you'd be into that because it does do some really interesting messed up stuff with religion.
One of the actors that's in that show, Raul Cooley, is someone that I follow on Twitter, and he's in that show, and so that's how it even came on my radar the first time. But,
okay, yeah. I think he's the sheriff.
Yeah, he is. So
he's really good.
Yeah, I'm dope to dive into that. I forgot it was already out. So
yeah, I think it just came out like 5 days ago or something like that.
Okay,
yeah.
I have something to do tonight.
It's getting all the hype. It's from the same creator of Bly Manor and Hill House as well, which both like really good
Mike
spooky
Flanagan.
TV shows. Yeah. I have to add that to my list as well.
So who's next?
Paul?
Okay, so that's not on my list, but like I'm really enjoying Midnight Mass, but it felt like it would be perfect for Corbin. So, geez, my first there's no order here, so this is certainly not my origin, but I feel like it's been sort of more my flag for the last like decade plus. Excuse me, is a movie called Lake Mungo, which I probably talked about when I was on here last time.
It does sound familiar. Is that an Australian film?
Yeah, an Australian movie. It's presented as a documentary about the aftermath of a 16-year-old girl who drowned. And they're interviewing like her parents and his brother, and there's some weird ghostly shit stuff happening. I can say shit, right?
You can curse. You can fucking curse, Paul. It's all right.
I had a flashback that I was back in the classroom today. I was like, oh no. But it's just how it's presented. It feels so real. Like that's the thing about the movie. And there was a British company that just put out a Blu-ray that's like all region, which is always nice. Like I don't want to buy the wrong region Blu-ray. Like that's happened. It makes me angry. And they talked about like sort of the how insanely obsessed the director was with making this seem as real as possible, to the lengths that he went to. Insofar as like there really wasn't a script, it was all like ad-libbed. So it was all these characters being interviewed. Obviously they had some scene ideas set up, but anyway, there's definitely hints of supernatural, and then there's a twist where you think, oh no, it's not, and then there's, oh no, it is. And there's a scene in that movie that just so left me like shook and terrified, because I watched it. People were home, but I was by myself awake, really dark at night. And there's a scene that the whole movie builds up to, and the brilliant part of it is this image that's super terrifying starts off far away and starts moving closer to you. And I don't want to say too much more, but like to the point, so like you're in the moment, like, oh no, like I know I don't want to see this. I know it's coming. It's so heartbreaking. And I don't know, my novel Disappearance at Devil's Rock is definitely inspired by that movie and a couple other Australian films too. So that's always a go-to movie for me, because it's usually a lesser known for people who maybe don't watch a lot of horror movies. And it's also a movie I think you can show to non-horror people too, because it's not gory. It's just a really interesting, well done story too.
Yeah, I wrote it down.
You had mentioned that the last time we talked, and I checked it out, and it's very well done. And it definitely hits you hard, because there's some like real moments where you feel these characters' pain, where they're talking about, she's passed away, and there's kind of a whodunit element to it as well. Right. Was it like foul play, or was it that just one of those freak accidents that happens? And it does a really good job of kind of pulling at your heartstrings.
Definitely. Now there's fun, like obvious, like reference to like Laura Palmer, like because her last name is Palmer, like to like a Twin Peaks kind of thing. But it's definitely not like a surreal Twin Peaks kind of experience, but it's more like that small town thing anyway. Okay, that's enough. Lake Mungo.
Nice.
Lake Mungo.
I struggled to make my list. At first I made a list of, I did, because at first I made a list that was, what are my 3 favorite scary movies? And that's slightly different than like, how would you summarize your taste in scary movies? So they're not necessarily one and the same, though I found these movies were definitely on my top list. The first one, I've talked about this movie in the cast before. Corbin, I'm diehard Aliens fan.
Oh, okay, I thought you were going to say
The Shining.
I was like, my knuckles were white, and I was like, I'm going to be tame because Paul's on here and Stephen King's his boy, but I'm about to go toe to toe with you, my guy.
You need to read the book. I'm just going to leave it at that. Read the book if you didn't like the movie. But Aliens was one of those movies that had a huge impact on me as a kid. So I grew up loving scary movies from a way too young age. My dad he was all into it. And I started probably when I was 4 or 5 watching the classic Universal horror movies. So, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Those were like on a constant loop for me. So I kind of fell in love with monsters. Then, I grew up a little bit. I'm probably around my daughter's age now. I'm probably around 10 years old. The first time that I sat down and watched Alien and Aliens, and Aliens is as well done as they come. It's very different from Alien. I'd say Aliens more of like your haunted house movie. Aliens is more of like horror mixed with action, because there's a ton of action in the movie as well. But to this day, I'll say Aliens is probably the best monster movie out there. The Xenomorph's terrifying. It does a really good job of making you feel claustrophobic and that you're constantly being surrounded. And there are so many iconic shots that just stick with you after all this time. There's a shot where, not to spoil the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it, I don't know if you can really spoil a movie from the.
Yeah, I think it's over 30 years old.
It's 86, so I think I'm fine. But the premise of the movie is Ripley goes back because there's reports of aliens, right? And there's the scene where she, finds this little girl who's living in this on this planet, hiding from the xenomorphs. Her name's Newt. And there's this scene where she kind of falls down into what's like a sewer system. And she's walking through the sewer, holding her little stuffed animal, yelling Ripley's name. And then a xenomorph pops up and it's just monstrous and huge and terrifying. And it really encumbers everything that I love about horror. And it really highlights the things that I hate in horror as well. I really hate the direction that a lot of scary movies have gone, where everything's CGI and you see the monster a ton. There's no element of suspense. The monster's in your face the whole time. And as you sit there and look at it, it just looks faker and faker. This was one of those movies where you see the monster enough to where it like captures your imagination, but not so much that you're not scared of it anymore. And it's the epitome of practical effects for me. These puppets are just terrifying. I wish we would go backwards in time and stop relying on CGI and go back to practical effects and puppets, because it's hard to beat those in my book.
100%. Plus, who can turn down a whiny Bill Paxton, Oh no, man.
That's very good.
There's a little bit of that 80s cheese, just a little bit of the cheese, but it's definitely worth your time.
Yeah. I wonder if James Cameron would ever be interested in actually tackling like a true horror film in his old age of like, I only want to do documentaries and Avatar films for the next 30 years.
Was it Titanic a horror movie? I don't know. I've actually never seen Titanic.
Oh, you haven't? It actually,
No.
it isn't. If you can make it past the third VHS tape, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
age
yourself without aging yourself. You can make it past the third VHS tape.
Yeah. So for my second pick, I'll actually restructure it. I was going to say as my third, but I'll piggyback off of what you were saying, which is sometimes horror can excel and exceed when they are more pulled back on revealing the monster or showing what's happening. So my second pick of my three is a movie that does just that, where they don't ever show the monster, and it's Paranormal Activity 3. Now, the reason why the third one is particularly near and dear to my heart, I remember when the first one came out, I was one of those guys who was like online trying to submit to get it in my city, because like that truly was like an indie self-funded film that didn't have the money for mass production and distribution. And I remember like, wow, this is really cool. Like you can do so much with so little. And as the sequels, progress, they definitely pour more money into them, but they try to make it look like they didn't. But one thing that I always respected in the Paranormal Activity movies is their emphasis on trying to put fear in some sort of mechanic beyond just like a jump scare. So like, the first one was just standard found footage. The second one, they wanted to go about this like home security system, and that's how you're like observing the family. But in this one, they did something that was really interesting, which was as kind of like the stand-in dad, the boyfriend of the family, was trying to capture as much information as he could. He took like a rotary fan and put the camera on top of it. And the moment he did that, I will never forget. It's one of the few times I ever said anything audibly aloud in the theater. I go, fuck. Because I knew what they were doing, and they were going to use this mechanic of this camera just ever turning and it being slow too. So it's like expertly builds this tension. But yeah, that movie was one that I had so much fun in the theater. And I feel like most of these that I have that are near and dear to my heart definitely have a tie to the actual experience that I had with them. But this is one that I was just like, it fucking got me, and I loved it.
Nice. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm looking up a few things here so I can sound intelligent, because I forget. So like I've taken this challenge to somewhat heart, like the idea, like, my tastes, so I'm cheating by saying, so Jaws was like the movie that sort of scared the hell out of me. Stephen King's The Stand, I feel like sort of made me into a reader. So I probably should pick that. But I guess for my official second choice, I'm doing like this 80s montage of things.
Nice.
So I'm going, and I'm mixing books too. Stephen King's Skeleton Crew, one of his short story collections.
Mm-hmm.
And this one opens with The Mist, which, many people, that's one of their favorite Stephen King stories. I think it's so much better than the movie. I don't want to talk about it because I get upset. So like within Skeleton, so you've got, The Mist, which is amazing, monster story, essentially very Lovecraftian monster story, but there's a quieter story that ends the book called The Reach, which I just think is so haunting. It's one of the few of his stories, like one of his major stories, I would call them, the ones that people still remember, like that remember and talk about frequently, that hasn't been made into something. I would volunteer myself to do that if anyone out there wants to give the money. Then there's like just crazy stories in there, like I think it's Survivor Type. Is that the one where like a dude's on like an island, he's cutting off pieces of himself to stay alive? Some just wild, quote unquote, like, horror with like a sense of humor, like fun type of stuff. And in that vein, so I got Skeleton Crew. Evil Dead 2 is one of my favorite movies. Even though like anything I write is nothing like Evil Dead 2, except I would hope maybe just some of the, I don't know, just some of the spirit of that movie, like of the kinetic joyfulness in there, somewhere. It's just such a crazy fun movie. And then also The Thing in my 80s sort of drive by. The Thing is, one of my favorite movies. I always rewatch it every year. I do think the connection is, the characters and performances in that movie. Obviously the practical effects, which you talked about earlier, Tim, are, still today are amazing.
Yeah, it's still kind of unsettling watching that.
Absolutely. And any, the attempt to make the reboot, or not the reboot, the prequel, is terrible. Because it was CGI, where so you have all that, but it wouldn't work without Kurt Russell playing McCready or Keith David playing I'm spacing on his name, and some of the other characters, Wilford Brimley, who I think was probably in his 30s and looked 60 in that movie. And Clark and the other characters. So for me, those, especially when I was, a kid and then a teenager in the late 80s, those are the things that I watched. I wasn't much of a reader then. So it was like, The Thing was what sort of, really put the horror sort of love in me.
Yeah. I mean, The Thing is, it's a masterpiece, and it's a visual effect. It's like the Mecca to me. Like, watching the behind the scenes on how they did some of these practical effects is so interesting. And they had to do crazy things to get these effects to actually work. And I mean, if you haven't seen The Thing, you're missing out, because it truly is a masterpiece. And to me, it's probably it's probably the movie that defines 80s horror, in my opinion, because it's got a little bit of everything in it.
Yeah. Sure. And the prequel, they started to make prosthetic designs of the monster in that movie, and some fucking producer got in there and was like, nah, let's just stop this where it's at and do CG because it's cheaper. I was like, okay.
It's just, I mean, not to go too far on a tangent, but I text Clayton and Corbin this weekend. My kids wanted to sit down and watch Jurassic World. We're gearing up to go back to Universal here in a couple of weeks. And we're like, hey, let's watch some Universal movies that, we're going to be able to ride the roller coasters and stuff. And the effects just don't stand up. And I don't think CGI really ever stands up, because it's always getting better. And unless you have elite CGI like Marvel movies does, I think it's always going to look dated when you go backwards and you watch a movie that's, 5-10 years old.
Even then, like, Marvel looks like I'm watching a video game at times, when it's 1,000 characters. The one set of movies that I've rewatched recently, not to go on a tangent, but I do think it's like, wow, sometimes it's hard to tell the CG stuff is the Christopher Nolan Batman movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's partly because it is, it's just Batman and not 1,000 other superheroes flying around. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you use CGI to help enhance an experience or to help build a detailed background, I think it usually works. But when you're trying to make a main character or a monster completely out of CGI, it doesn't feel like it works. Like, let's do puppets like we used to, these huge animatronic puppets. And if you need to embellish it with CGI afterwards, then great. But the bulk of it needs to be a real thing. I'm going to stand firm with that. I mentioned Aliens as being one of my favorites. You go back to the most recent installment, Alien Covenant, and the monster's just not scary. And it's because it's CGI and it just doesn't work for me. Yeah. Good. Well, I like the 80s montage. I'm going to piggyback off of it. I'm not going to do a montage, but I'm going to stick with Stephen King, and I'm going to go with It. I struggled with this one. I almost went with Salem's Lot because that book is just so much fun. But I think It was the book that really pulled me into horror and reading scary books. At that time, I wasn't a reader. This isn't that long ago. I wasn't a big reader. I was going on a vacation. I wanted something to read on the plane and picked up It.
With two hands, because it's quite a large book.
It's literally, it's that big. It's insane. It was before they had talked about making any movies. So it was just a complete whim. Walking down the aisle at Walmart, you see this book. And I think that's maybe the best horror book I've ever read, primarily because it really builds characters to a level that other books just can't. And part of that's because the book's like 1,200 pages long. And so you have a lot of time that you can devote to building these characters up and building their relationship out. But I think that's ultimately what makes it scary, is the fact that you really have a connection with these kids. You can feel like you've been a part of the Losers Club as you're reading this. And now there's a legitimately real threat that could kill them. And that's what adds the terror to it. It's not necessarily that Pennywise is terrifying, but I think in the books at time he is. It's really that you're like terrified for these kids because you're there in the moment. So I'm a diehard Stephen King fan. It probably goes down as one of my, not just favorite Stephen King books, one of my favorite books of all time. I think if I were to like rate my two favorite books, not to go on a tangent, but it would be It, and it would probably be Steinbeck's East of Eden. Like, those are the two books that I point at and say, like, that's got everything that you want in a book.
Right on. Combine the two books could be East of It.
East of It. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's funny. Well, I guess my last movie that would kind of just round out what I love in horror films in general is one that inspired me so much that I read an editorial piece on like how to make a sequel, and it is The Strangers 2: Prey at Night. I think when you have a movie that you want to have a sequel to off of a film like The First Strangers, that is such a definitive film, it knew what it was. And you can't really replicate what you did in the first one without being derivative. They're like, we have to kind of be a little bit self-aware of what we're doing and kind of change the tone, much like season 2 of The Strangers had to do that as well. Not Strangers, Stranger Things. Stranger Things 1 is a murder mystery sci-fi whodunit, and the next season had to be one where they're expanding the world. You can't do the same archetype. Yep. So Prey at Night said, we're going to, pay an ode to 80s slasher films, but we're going to do it in a modern way, which I totally respected. They used tropes from 80s slasher films that worked really well, had a bombastic soundtrack to boot. The color grading of the movie was fantastic. There are some gorgeously shot scenes in that movie, particularly where the older son is going toe-to-toe with the dad of the killing family at the pool, and you have all these like neon lights surrounding the pool. It was just like fucking eye candy. But one thing that they do to elevate the trope or the 80s experience is they don't use all the tropes, meaning that the characters feel real and fleshed out and had real emotions and weren't doing like necessarily stupid things. So for me, it was like the perfect like modern ode to an 80s film. And I respect making a sequel and saying we can't make this like a true like narrative sequel. It needs to be like its own thing. Like the first one was its own thing. So Strangers Prey at Night for me is like one that I watch every year. An honorable mention, Trick or Treat is a horror movie that I have to watch every fucking year.
So Corbin, not to derail us, but 2 weekends ago, Jody's starting to get in the spooky mood, and she goes, let's watch a scary movie. And she wanted to watch the Halloween remake because Halloween Kills comes out in a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, we can watch this one tomorrow. Let's try Trick or Treat. And we watched Trick or Treat, and I'm sitting there like with this big goofy smile on my face the whole time. And I looked at her at the end. I'm like, so what'd you think? And she goes, that was stupid.
No,
I knew you were going to say that. I knew it. No. That movie is so fun because it knows what it is the entire time.
Yeah, dude.
It's not trying to be anything that it's not. And that's what I really appreciated about that movie. I
always love, like, also when I'm watching a movie, particularly like that, it's not necessarily subplot, but it just shows the world is like truly living. And if you're actually paying attention, you get to see characters from like the other stories in the background leading up to where their story actually began in the disjointed like narrative that is that film. And to me, I fucking love that kind of shit.
Yeah. Everything being connected, even if it's just by happenstance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah.
Paul, what's your third pick?
Man, it's so hard, but so I'm going to go with.
There's no backseat, so whatever you say is like in stone, you know. So
in YouTube stone, in podcast stone. So I'm going to go with The Haunting of Hill House novel, not the show. Mm-hmm. You know, the show is fine, but the novel itself is just. I mean, it's the prototype of the 20th century, you know, haunted house novel. Like, I don't know. We probably don't need any more ghost stories after that one. And part of what still makes it so brilliant and still relevant to now is, again, the characters, you know, particularly Eleanor, like, you know, what she's thinking in her relationship with essentially these other ghost hunters. And what people miss, and Flanagan, you know, to his credit, when he remade it, or when he adapted it, I should say, for the Netflix show, it's so not the book, but it's purposeful. I think that was actually a wise choice on his part to sort of take the characters and create something different, but with sort of the spirit, some of the spirit of Hill House. Like even, you know, the older sister's name was Shirley. That was, you know, she's not in The Haunting of Hill House. You know, there's no house hunt, you know, no ghost sort of hunting crew that shows up. But, you know, the thing that maybe people, I don't think, expect if they do go back and read the Jackson, how readable it is, how funny it is at times. There's this really biting, smart, satirical sense of humor in this book. And the ending is just absolutely horrifying. You know, and the TV show went in a totally different, you know, happy hold hands direction, which I won't discuss necessarily, but
completely different. Direction.
Yeah. But yeah, the book ends with just this devastating blow.
I was infuriated, Paul, when I was in Salem. There was a bookstore, and we walked in, and, you know, we're just kind of thumbing through books, and Shirley Jackson's Hill House is there. And I pick it up and I laughed and pointed to my wife. She hasn't watched the show or read the book, so she didn't get it. But for the book, they actually put the thumbnail for the television show. And I was like, this is the biggest bait and switch of all time, because the book is nothing like the movie. Like they're completely different things. So like, if you pick up that and you're expecting to get the Netflix show, you're going to be disappointed or surprised, because
I don't know if I hope you wouldn't be disappointed. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of the you know, if
you got to sell it.
If one of my books get made into a movie, I know there will be the media tie-in. I'm like, please do, like, put
yes,
you know, put whatever movie images on this thing. Like, yeah, let it find out there. No, I'm very happy that both are, you know, two completely different things. And there's a ton of things I really like. I just don't like the ending of the TV show. But like episodes, is it 5 and 6 or 4 and 5? Like there's a run of 2 episodes. They're just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I would say filmmaking, even though it's a TV show, but just, you know, visual storytelling.
Yeah. The one where it's like made to seem like it was like in one shot as they're going through and they're switching in the kids and stuff. I was like, oh.
Yeah. I think it was the episode after that. There was some really important sort of reveals, you know, particularly about Nell, what happens to her. This is really good. So that's why I'm really interested to see how Midnight Mass ends. Because, man, it is dark as fuck right now.
I cannot wait to watch it.
I'm gonna have to, after this, I'm making dinner for my girlfriend. We might watch that tonight. I'm excited.
Yeah. No, it definitely has Stephen King vibe, but it's its own thing. Like in terms of like, you know, isolated, this isn't a spoiler, isolated town on a dying town really on this small island off the coast of Oregon. So you learn about all these different characters, and he really does a great job of like giving equal time and keeping, being slow when it needs to be, and then revealing things that are going to keep you going. And the performances are really good. But yeah, anyway, sorry. Shirley Jackson. I mean, she's obviously one of my favorites. Was one of the 5 people that helped start the Shirley Jackson Awards. We're obviously a huge fan. And actually tomorrow, I should plug this.
Yes.
Tomorrow, Tuesday, Ellen Datlow edited an anthology, and she's like the preeminent horror editor. Like, she's done millions of anthologies. But there's a book called When Things Get Dark, and they're all short stories inspired by Shirley Jackson.
Okay.
So I have a story in it.
Great.
And so many of, amazing horror writers like Stephen Graham Jones, Liz Hand, Laird Barron, John Langan, Maria Carmen Machado, like, some really
lots of great
sort of big hitters. Names. Yeah. Writing stories inspired by Shirley Jackson. So that's out tomorrow as well.
Fantastic. And what's that called one more time, Paul?
When Things Get Dark.
When Things Get Dark. Perfect.
Yeah.
Definitely check that out if you're listening to the
cast. So September 28th, right? I guess, I don't know. Time is weird in podcast land.
Yes.
I'm saying
true.
tomorrow. We're recording this on the 28th. So Tuesday. So yeah, by the time you're listening to this, When Things Get Dark is out.
Yep. And definitely check that out.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to give you the last pick. I kind of teased it before, but I'm going to go with the original Halloween.
Okay.
I would say helps define my taste, because I fell in love with 80s slashers like lots of kids my age. And to me, it's hard to beat classic Michael Myers. I don't like a lot of the supernatural stuff they did later in the series when you get to like 4 or 5, and those movies just didn't work for me. But the original Halloween and the sequel, I think, are top of the food chain when it comes to slasher films. It does a really good job of, again, making you feel claustrophobic. Like you're in this small town and he's just going to keep coming for you. And I think that is the epitome of, late 70s, early 80s slasher and Michael Myers. So the original Halloween up there in my top 3. I can't wait for Halloween Kills. I'm not going to derail us, but I'm going to say that we really need to get to a spot where we don't have 5 trailers for a scary movie, especially a scary movie. I've purposely ignored the last 2 trailers. I'm like, okay, every trailer, it's all completely new footage. It's not like they're just rebranding the same few scenes. Like all the kills, all the scares are going to be blown if I keep watching these trailers. So one trailer, give me one good trailer, especially when you're talking about Halloween, about Michael Myers. He sells himself. So one trailer is all you need. I'm hooked in. Leave the rest to be a surprise when I see the movie.
I couldn't agree more. Trailers are a pet peeve of mine.
It's ridiculous. Like you can skip probably half of the movies out there and just watch the trailer and have a very good understanding of what's going on. You have the highs, you have the lows, you have pretty much everything.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, thank you for taking some time today to hang out with Corbin and I. Thanks for joining us on the Nerdosphere again. Be sure to check out Paul's works. You can get Survivor Song. You can get A Head Full of Ghosts. He's got all kinds of great things out there. So definitely check out Paul.
And where can the people find you, Paul?
Out there in the interwebs.
Outside
their window right now.
It's the scratch you hear on your window at night.
If not, then I'm on Twitter at Paul G. Tremblay. Instagram, same, at Paul G. Tremblay. There's a Facebook page with no G, just Paul Tremblay. My website, though, is paultremblay.net. And on that front page, there's a sign up to a newsletter. If you're a newsletter person, and I don't spam your email box, I only send one out like once a month with I don't know, updates, but also hopefully some fun rantings and observations.
Nice. And we'll make sure to leave that in the show notes as well. So if anyone is listening or watching, you can scroll down to the description and find all of those links.
Thanks. No, this was a lot of fun to see you guys again.
Yep.
And if you're listening to the podcast, you don't get to see Corbin's amazing beard.
I appreciate you. Say more. That's fantastic.
Well, Corbin, you want to take us out?
Well, thank you all for joining us this week on the Nerdosphere. we are now launching into our Spooktober themed episodes. So you can be catching us every Thursday on free feeds as we're coming out at you with a new horror themed spooky topic. Is it a scary bathroom story? Is it our favorite horror book that has not been made into a movie? Is it our favorite horror remakes, or maybe horror films that should be remade? I don't know. The list could go on, and it's still developing as we speak. But if you love what we do, you can always catch us at patreon.com/thenerdosphere. We can figure out a way to support us. But if you don't have the kind of support to lend us there, you can always, if an Apple device, scroll on down, leave us a nice review and a 5-star rating. That always helps us in the algorithm to be pushed into new ears so we can keep growing this nerdy community. Paul, Tim, seriously, Paul, I love having you on. I cannot wait to talk to you again. Tim, I can wait to talk to you again.
The feeling's mutual.
Yeah. And what Clayton's missing? Clayton? Screw that guy.
Yeah.
He's dead to us.
In his defense, his wedding anniversary was yesterday, and their water heater broke, so they spent the entire day fixing it, and it still isn't fixed.
Oh, that sucks.
So he's knee deep in just literal, just not
cold
greatness,
water.
And having to take his wife out for anniversary dinner. So I
retract any shade I threw his way.
All right, gents. Well, again, thank you for joining us this week on the Nerdosphere. We'll catch you on the flip side.
See ya.